Arc 6, The Corridor of Memories. Chapter 73, Natsuki Subaru. With the Book of the Dead which had Natsuki Subaru inscribed on it in his hands, he stood still. Subaru. Widening his dark eyes in astonishment, Subaru felt his throat rapidly turning parched. Modest expressions such as astonishing or stupefying would be far too lacking. What had struck Subaru at that moment was something much more serious, something as if numbing harm. A lethal toxic which would wield effect only when used on Subaru, and nobody else. The Book of the Dead of Natsuki Subaru was piercing through Subaru whilst commanding such powerful connotation. Subaru, why? So, the Book of the Dead not supposed to be here was present here. What was supposed to be present in the third layer of Pleiades' watchtower, Taijida, were the books of the dead recording the lives of the departed. Having the book of a living being was contradictory. Or perhaps, could this mean he simply, by chance, had found the book of a human with the same name and surname? Subaru, that would have actually been convincing, had this not been a different world. The possibility that rose to the surface in his mind was instantly repudiated. Though it was a matter of course, this place was a different world. In this place, where even the rules of naming would be vastly different from what Subaru was aware of, why would a name like Natsuki Subaru take birth here? Even before that, there lay a decisive issue. The title of that book of Natsuki Subaru had been written in kanji. Subaru. From what all Subaru had witnessed till now, even letters were disparate in this different world. That is why, even if someone else, aside from Subaru, who did not know of the world's letters were to see it, they would probably perceive this title as if being hieroglyphic characters or something of that sort. If that were to be considered, the unbelievable chances of Subaru finding the Book of the Dead of Natsuki Subaru here through sheer luck were. Subaru, it has predetermined and established whom this belongs to. He could only think of that being true. Subaru. Once again, with the Book of the Dead in his hands, Subaru silenced himself and pondered. The reason why Subaru happened upon this Book of the Dead was because he had depended upon the dim response he had spied out through Cor Leonis. This had not been the first or second time he had searched for a book in the library, though Subaru was mindful of it. Discovering the book being aimed for in this enormous archive was a deed next to impossible to achieve. Perhaps, the kind unattainable unless God's invisible hand was being put to work. Subaru, or perhaps, not God, but someone's. Subaru convicted, as if having anticipated that. The rest lay in the authenticity of this Book of the Dead, whether what was depicted here was truly the life of Natsuki Subaru or not. If it was depicted indeed, then what sort of a trick was behind it? As the solemn truth, Subaru was here, alive. If the Book of the Dead of this Subaru was truly here, then. Subaru, am I being treated as deceased ever since I lost my memories? The Books of the Dead of Taijida, that hall of memories, is even observing the worlds I die in. If that were the case, then in no way is it inconceivable that it was depicting Subaru's deaths in some type of form through the Book of the Dead. However, in that case, what did that make of return by death? Subaru, whether it rewinds time, or does it rebuild the world itself, I had given a thought to both, but for the argument's sake, in the case that the Books of the Dead assumed a method to generate the Book of Natsuki Subaru, it could not be helped but to reach the conviction that the latter had much more likelihood. If that holds true, then the phenomenon which encased this Natsuki Subaru was not something as charming as return by death, but Subaru, am I an idiot? No, I am an idiot. Damn, coward. Sensing his contemplation disarray into a slant, Subaru abused himself. Why his thoughts had gone astray, he understood the reason for that by immediately noticing his own cowardice. He was merely frightened of the Book of the Dead. What would happen when he would read the Book of Natsuki Subaru? He was frightened of that happening whose course was completely unfathomable. That is why, pursuing the hypothesis lacking all foundation, he was trying to delay it and keep delaying it. Of opening up the first page of the book within his hands. Subaru. Though it was not a hypothesis which came into being merely 5 minutes ago or anything, the fact that the Book of the Dead of Natsuki Subaru was present here was strange, but for Subaru, it was also salvation. Subaru also considered the evidence that it had not popped up and appeared at just this instant. However, along with that, it also held the meaning that a Natsuki Subaru other than himself had certainly existed and had walked his own path in this different world, and also that Subaru was trampling upon those footsteps from above, laying waste to them, and painting them out. That is why, all that was left was to gain confirmation. Subaru, first of all, as the Book of the Dead of Natsuki Subaru. Where does this thing start from, and where does it end at? At Meilei's instance, precisely from her infancy onwards, ever since she gained awareness of, ever since her memories had been established as memories, even her half-death was able to be followed up to. However, how would things unfold in Subaru's case? Having read the Book of the Dead, it originated with sprouting a self-consciousness identical to that of Meili, facing growth over time, and finally, where it all came to an end. If Natsuki Subaru was being counted as deceased instead of the present Natsuki Subaru who lost his memories, to follow up to Natsuki Subaru's memories till the moment immediately preceding the loss of memories would be natural, or perhaps not. Instead, perhaps it would follow up to the memories of the present Subaru, who had lost his memories and awakened inside the tower. In that scenario, which death would it choose for the end? Otherwise, as Reed's Book of the Dead, what would merely be present would be a wreckage of memories turned void. Just as the memories of Reed, which had been recorded in the Book of the Dead, had disappeared from within the book in order to reconstruct him as the trial taker of this tower, the memories of Natsuki Subaru had also possibly disappeared. That is why, what would be visible after opening this book would not be the memories of Natsuki Subaru, but Subaru, in the end, what do you want to do, cowardly bastard? Does he desire to see it, does he desire not to see it? Disdaining his own self, who had been unable to easily respond to that, reprimanding the fearfully curled up, he exhaled. After coming this far, it was inconceivable to opt for not seeing it. Even if it had risen to the surface as an option, he could not even envisage the lunacy of choosing it. That is why. That is why. WHY. And then. Subaru, Huck. Taking a powerful breath in, he opened up the Book of the Dead. And the journey of Natsuki Subaru, of an unknown origin and an unknown termination. This is seriously bad. Tasting a solid sensation on his face, his brain was being scorched by the flaming heat in his abdomen. Violent fever which restricted even his breathing, his head felt hot as if magma had been poured into his blood vessels. Yet his limbs turned colder and heavier, the inconsistent sensations jolting his existence down to the very soul itself. His thoughts screamed about what had occurred. His thoughts screamed that he must do something. With those flowing in and intertwining, he gave rise to a screech. However, his consciousness, which was screaming he must do something, proved to be futile. The moment he moved his hands in an attempt to break out of the deadlock and touched his guts, which were the origin of the scorching heat, his palm was drenched wet with thick blood, and he understood that further blood also had the floor drenched. Ah, is all of this my blood? Though he was unaware of the amount of blood that had flowed on and inundated the floor, the bleeding had not been of the level of blood donation and so forth. The source of his life streaming out did not put a halt to the fragile lamp of life. In short, his flesh body had already commenced the countdown to death. Even still, the reason why he had not died yet was because for this life of his, which was heading towards its death, there yet remained a mission to fulfill. He had to raise his voice. He must raise his voice. Watch out. It's dangerous. Don't come here. Run. Without turning back even once, run at full speed. And he must inform about the hazard. He must convey it to her, inform her about danger, so that she does not enter this place. And yet, he was unable to raise his voice. What spilled out instead was the nauseating warm blood clot. With his throat clogged by that, he was rendered incapable of bringing out even a single uncouth word. Violently coughing, the scorching heat in his abdomen expanded. Ache and agony, misery and disorder, and Baru? The tone of the silver bell's voice eventually took a step into the space it must not enter. He had to stop that, no matter what. And yet, he did not make it. Though he had to do that even if it meant selling his life away for it, just because his guts had gotten lacerated. Huck! A scream echoed, someone collapsed down onto the floor along with a violent report. The hand of that fallen someone, overlapping with hand of his fallen self, was an offensive prank on part of the far too ironic fate. In all ways, the wickedness of the one known as fate was far too onerous to describe with words. Those weakly trembling fingers softly grasped that overlapping hand. Grasping back that sensation of fingers, as if they were clinging and relying upon, Subaru deeply, along with that clump of blood, inhaled. 8. The overflowing clot of blood, the seeping and streaming away life. He could not stop that outward flow of blood. No longer could he do anything. This situation had reached its absolute limits. All due to a single powerless, incompetent man, everything was going to start afresh. That is why his vow died with this blood wielded no significance. Even though he knew nothing could be done, his idiocy yet commanded him to vow. Even though he knew it was over. Even though he knew it will be over. As if those were not coming to an end, disgracefully, he vowed. I will, for sure. Save you. At the next instant, Natsuki Subaru lost his life. The moment the connection was severed, Subaru sensed firm pain at the back of his head. Subaru, ga hook. The impact reverberating in his skull, he hallucinated as if he had been suddenly struck from behind, but he immediately understood that he was mistaken. Because Subaru's body had collapsed right behind, and he could feel the entirety of his back make contact with the chilling floor. Subaru, this place is icy and dim, not in the soiled building, but he was in the library of Teijita. Slowly pouring energy back into his body, turning about his dumbfounded head, Subaru turned his neck around and then touched his own guts with great perplexity. There supposed to be present was the wound which would diminish his life. However, Subaru, not there. Not there, the wound is not there. The slash in the guts is not there. Hook. Touching his guts countless times, he confirmed the disappearance of the origin of scorching heat. Within the spectacle he had witnessed immediately previously, that utmost vivid sensation was vanishing. He had heard that the brain hallucinates ache far too scorchingly hot as a fever. A phenomenon identical to what had occurred. In other words, Subaru, a memory of having the guts be slashed open and dying. The end of having the guts cut open by a sharp-edged tool, drowning in the foam of blood and powerlessness, and dying. Finally, if he himself had alone been the one to die by that, it was still excusable. However, that was not how it had been. Subaru, sat Ella. What he whispered, at the very end of the end, the girl he had been unable to save, her name, her alias. Within that memory, the silver-haired young girl he recognized had fabricated her name and come in contact with Subaru. What had been the reason behind that? Though it was evident no evil intent was the reason for it. Subaru, still, dying such an uncouth way. Putting his hand on his forehead, Subaru ruminated about what had occurred to his own body. Summoned to the different world, wandering aimlessly in the town with foolish positivity, picking up a quarrel with delinquents and almost dying, saved by Sat Ella from that, and assisting her in her search for what she was looking for. Subaru, completely useless. At the final moment, without even conveying the crisis he was supposed to convey, he ended up having her get involved as well. Not just dying wastefully, the word vain in the expression dying in vain could not even make for an excuse. The life of Natsuki Subaru could never compensate for it. Subaru, but it was not as if he had gained absolutely nothing from it. Subaru, this was the Book of the Dead of Natsuki Subaru. That alone was the certain, absolute, unquestionable truth. Subaru. Hopeless, foolish, weak, irredeemable Natsuki Subaru. He continued to enlarge his absurd self-consciousness, overlapping with that, averted his eyes away from his lack of filial piety. And finally, using being summoned into the different world as a convenient means of escaping, and by exhibiting pessimistic positivity, he became a swindler trying to deceive himself, those around him, anything and everything. The result of that idiocy had tied together with the tragedy in that loot storehouse. What a pretentious, naive, and foolish failure had it been. How come could he stay defenseless at that hazardous place? What gave your idiotic self such baseless confidence? Like that, it would not be odd to get killed overseas, let alone in a different world. That lack of vigilance was to blame. The result of it all must be that it had been so unsightly, such that he would have wanted to kill himself had he survived. Subaru, that hopeless, idiotic bastard. But evidently, it had been fatal foolishness, but it was fortuitous to have it affirmed. Putting a check on his rage, enduring it, he scrutinized that truth closely. The Book of the Dead was certainly functioning. That book had recorded the death of Natsuki Subaru. And it thrust a great number of truths, which were a matter of course for Natsuki Subaru, for whom there was no way to know them. To name it specifically, it was the sequence of events of obtaining return by death. As per convention, an existence who was God, or wielded similar strength, normally in a transcendental state of being, summoned Subaru to the different world. However, for that Natsuki Subaru, if he were to not have the memories of being summoned by such a transcendental being, there would be no occasion where he would get to know whom he got the power granted to him from and how he grew conscious of that power. That was something Subaru could affirm, who had seen the end of that Natsuki Subaru for himself. At the very end of the end, though he had been blabbering things without knowing when to give up, at that moment, Natsuki Subaru was supposed to not have any confirmation that he would overcome death and rewind time. At the very least, he himself had been like that. Thinking that far, he abruptly noticed that he and Natsuki Subaru had not been objected well visually. The reason for that, evident. Subaru, it's diving more deeply in than on Meili's instance. He had read Meili's Book of the Dead, and personally experienced her life. He had tasted the sensation of having his mind undergo influence quite severely as well. Halfway melting together with her personality, Meili appeared within his mind as a symptom of hallucination, such that she said all what she wanted to say, and was toying around with Subaru. Above all, that had ultimately been a Meili fabricated by Subaru's consciousness, utterly unrelated to the real Meili, an illusion brought forth by chaos. He was aware of that. Subaru. However, this instance's Book of the Dead demarcated a line between itself and Meili's experience. All things said and done, in the chaos immediately after reading Meili's book, still present were clues to differentiate between himself and her. The difference in gender, the difference in age, the difference in values, there were plenty. Detaching himself from her through those clues, even if slightly, it was a possibility to withdraw the comprehension that she was an entirely different existence. However, that was not how it was this time. None other than he himself was the party concerned. His self who was not himself, a situation which normally would not manifest. It laid expectation upon Natsuki Subaru, and pushed him into his fight with himself. His fight with himself. Judging by mere words, those were not words too cliché, but they were words which evidently and straightforwardly denoted the situation which Subaru had currently been placed in. The truth is, he possessed a negative outlook. Overlapping with his self, rather meant an act of painting his self out. The water washed by the dark paint called Natsuki Subaru dyed him as if with a paintbrush that had been dipped in that. Subaru, Emilia. Emilia, 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 Emilia. At the sensation of feeling himself be painted out, Subaru called Emilia's name, as if it were some magic. The reason why he chanted Emilia, that reason was evident. The Natsuki Subaru inside the Book of the Dead did not recognize her as Emilia. Trusting the alias he had been told, he saw through his duties as a buffoon till the very end of the end. That is why, that was the difference between the present Subaru and Natsuki Subaru. Subaru. With the roots of his teeth quivering, fearing the sensation of his self being whittled, Subaru looked at his feet. The single book he had dropped thoughtlessly, that had fallen there. Subaru. He continued to observe, such that Natsuki Subaru would have died. If considered now, mysteriously enough, the Book of the Dead commenced from the moment he arrived into the different world, from when he had shouted out the change of worlds with a foolishly bare expression. Even though for Meili's instance, it had properly commenced since she gained the awareness of no, for now, all that was of no significance. The problem was, the continuation to that Book of the Dead. Subaru, you must be thinking, the same, Natsuki Subaru. Thanks to the Book of the Dead, he was able to witness what was perhaps the death of Natsuki Subaru when he was first summoned into the different world for himself. However, that was merely the beginning. That Natsuki Subaru must have also utilized the power of return by death. Otherwise, that may have been a power which had manifested not in the form of return by death, but something further different. No, that was the natural state of affairs. Rewinding time at will, that was much more convincing. For Natsuki Subaru, who was met by Emilia, Beatrice, Ram, Echidna, Julius, Meili, Shala, Patrash, Gan, and was expected to play an active role, something like that was much more suitable. In that case, Subaru, that must be there, ahead of this. Natsuki Subaru, who seemed to be no different from Natsuki Subaru. However, there present was something decisive which caused that Natsuki Subaru to be Natsuki Subaru. Seeking that, Subaru, at once, held the book in his hands. And, closing his eyes, took deep breaths. Subaru. With the book in his hands, Subaru counted the beating of his chest. And while calming his down, he slowly commenced walking. A slow gait, however, straightforward, lacking all faltering. Before long, where Subaru had reached was in front of the bookshelf, and as he stretched his hand out. Subaru, second book. The single book following Natsuki Subaru made a weak assertion of itself through Cor Leonis. The progress Natsuki Subaru made was unsightly, haphazard, irredeemable. Completely useless. A novice as per appearance, with crude movements. Neither with any divine protections nor with any skills, imagined that there would at least be some instinct or intelligence, but not even that. Just, why must you challenge? Tormented by the self-indulging mighty enemy, he was minced without being able to even launch a proper counterattack. And in the environs of his wounded self, was a blood-stained old man and a golden-haired girl, collapsed. Neither of them could be saved. He could not even move. Slowly, 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 agonize. Before long, with his gut sliced, with his eyes sliced, within the world where he lost his eyesight, with a time limit running against his life, he lived the time until his death nestling close with dismay. Until the very end of the end, all whilst fearing, shivering, dreading, disgracefully. Hey, did you get stabbed? It can't be helped, you know. try running outside. It's more than just difficult. Ah, this won't do. If the insides of the guts get wounded, then it's death for sure. The clothes are all a mess too. Fallen with the opponent overhead of him, did he truly intend to make such heedless dialogue? He must use his brain for such worthless thoughts, otherwise he would be rendered unable to comprehend the shocking pain piercing through his back. A technique to escape pain, or a method to protect himself, to have possession of them would have astonished him to the bottom of his. He was unable to save himself from the truly futile, vain death. Calling the girl Sadella while she was not Sadella, having to hear harsh words from her due to that, unable to sense the strikingly obvious situation, killed by the opponent whom he already had tasted before abandoning thought. A suitable end. Why, from the beginning to the end, could he not live without regretting even for a second, even for a minute? Enough. This world was going to end. He knew it. Because from the very beginning, he knew and could see death, and henceforth came here. That is why, if there was not something decisive present, it was the end of this world. As it is the end, go to the next one. Go to the next, 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 to the next. Otherwise, it hurts, and it's painful, and it's unbearably hurtful, but something must be carried on to the next. The demise that was brought to him whilst he was asleep, contrary to a swift and easy end, was accompanied with mercilessness as if chilling venom was poured into his blood vessels. The arrival of the death whereby he couldn't even comprehend he had died, compared to the deaths till now in which he was unable to detach pain and suffering from himself, was perhaps the easiest one, is what he believed. However, in no way was that true. Why did he die? First of all, did he really die? Within humans fearful of death, the wish to die as if sleeping is substantially present, but if Subaru, who had experienced that, were to be asked, then he would respond that it was not worth wishing for. In death, there lies the meaning of death. In the demise, denouement of life, something which is learned from it must be attached to the end. Within chaos and despair, fright and yearning, Subaru sought the subsequent Book of the Dead. He must unravel what had occurred. He must unravel what had killed his self. Mysteries invited further mysteries, as incomprehensible and irrational deaths followed him. Overlapping ends, continual tragedies. Though he had refused dying as if sleeping, dying as if being shattered, as if being gouged out, were indeed not pleasant either. From next to next, his life was aimed for, robbed, shattered, and finally, betrayed. Why, was no longer the question for that. Why must he have to save the blue-haired girl who had killed his self? Why did his self become so frantic in order to save her? Why did she give such a powerful push to Subaru's back, who was crushed and knelt down? Why did he gain strength by her words, and resolve to move forward? Ahead of betrayal, he earnestly yearned. For the desire which had actually not been betrayed, for the world which affirmed that it was correct. Natsuki Subaru offered his life as indemnification for the sake of the fruitless, sorrowful misunderstanding of saving someone, and prized it open through sheer strength. Meeting Amelia, meeting Puck, meeting Felt, meeting Grandpa Ram, meeting Reinhardt, meeting Elsa, meeting Beatrice, meeting Ram, meeting Rem, meeting Roswell, meeting Petra, meeting the residents of Arlerm village. No matter what, he will thrust refusal at any muddy stream that may advance upon them, is what he believed. Subaru, ugh, boo. Hook. Putting a check on his lips, facing assailing death once again, Subaru knelt down in the library of Teijida. Without supporting his body, he collapsed onto the bare ground as if falling. Subaru, ha, ha. His breath was rough, what drenched the entirety of his body was abundant cold sweat. Whether it was hot, whether it was cold, whether it was bitter, whether it was sweet, whether it was agonizing, whether it was pleasant, his feelings were blended into a heterogeneous mixture of likes and dislikes, black and white, and he was unable to comprehend the correct answer. It felt as if he was being struck from all angles and directions ceaselessly, from next to next. Subaru, with this, 8 books. Discovering the Books of the Dead of Natsuki Subaru, and ever since he commenced reading them, he was merely piling up the number of books. To say the number of books was something odd in itself as well. Not that the numbering kept on ascending. Originally, to have the next book of the same series for a book present in this library was not how it was supposed to be. Yet, the books of Natsuki Subaru kept on piling up the number of books readily, and continued. Adding to the mystery, the structure of not being able to find the next book of Natsuki Subaru unless the first book of Natsuki Subaru was read, it all commenced orderly. Without skipping a single death for the purpose of an interval, he followed the footsteps of Natsuki Subaru. And, whilst following the footsteps, he thought about how tactlessly frank, incorrigible, immature Natsuki Subaru was. Particularly the last book, observing the fate of the 8th Book of the Dead, it was impossible to not feel that way. Immediately after the announcement of the royal election, fracturing his relationship with Emilia, ultimately, merely hurting her simply because he could, without any apology or retrospection, dying within the chaos was Natsuki Subaru. His self, who was reading the books, sunk with his consciousness equivalent with the subjectivity of the Book of the Dead. Merely the people concerned were supposed to particularly experience that effect, but it was still difficult to tolerate. His self, who thought why did he not understand, was present. On the other hand was his self, who thought why did he lament by not understanding through that, as well. Subaru, don't be trapped in the past. It was a tragedy he had witnessed with these eyes an instant ago, that is why his body ached as if being torn off. However, that was the past. At maximum, a happening that had occurred in the past. Even if it was a happening right in front of the eyes for Natsuki Subaru, who faced death at that instant. Even if it was a happening right in front of the eyes for Subaru, who was in agreement with Natsuki Subaru, who faced that instant. That was the past. Persisting by turning into a wound difficult to forget, it was the past. That is why, at the present instant, take a breather and escape the impact. Forget it. That someone killed Emilia. That someone committed that terrible spectacle in the village. If not, then would get shattered. What would he do should Subaru shatter here, rendered unable to stand up? How would someone do something? Natsuki Subaru was not present here. That is why there was no other choice but for Subaru to somehow manage through. Subaru, not yet. Has it been found? Subaru. There was supposed to be something decisive existing, bestowed only upon Natsuki Subaru. It would be the key to precisely distinguish between Natsuki Subaru and Natsuki Subaru. At the very least, until that key was procured, this voyage of going through books of the dead shall not terminate. The decisive key, which made Natsuki Subaru grow wings and attain flight, as Natsuki Subaru. The key which changed him into the savior who could catch Emilia, Beatrice, Ram, Echidna, Julius, Meili, Shala, Patrash, Gan, from falling. At the current instant, there were no signs of it. Natsuki Subaru could not possibly possess the mettle, the magnanimity, to be a savior or a hero, to be able to fulfill the immense duty of saving someone. What he possessed was merely standing out stubbornness, and the good fortune of being blessed by the people around him. However, that was not all. It was not that formless something. He possessed the omnipotent key, something which was further apparent, evident, which could be recognized at a single glance, which convinced everyone that he had the ability because he possessed that. He possessed it. That is why, seeking that. Subaru, number 9. Once again he tackled the samsara of death, whirling with mayhem and chaos, betrayal and despair. His wish, Natsuki Subaru. To turn into you, as fast as possible. Before I am no longer able to bear with your footsteps, your wounds, death, in my deaths, were accumulated relentlessly. Ends, were relentlessly accumulated. Each time he felt ache, each time he was in agony, each time he lost something, each time he was robbed of something, he heard the sound of cracking. Crying and screaming why and how, gritting his molars thinking it ends here, standing up whilst vomiting blood, sheathed in wounds, he advanced. The struggle of an uncouth man risking his life was present there. Not once but twice, not twice but thrice, not thrice but 4 times and so forth, getting cornered by situations and expiring, yet, he held his ground in order to smash through the lock of turmoil. That was amazing. Plenty amazing. Truly worthy of respect. To not give up, that was something quite amazing. Even after experiencing so much, gritting teeth so much, to fight to the bitter end was amazing. Truly admirable. Improved opinions. But, that was not it. But, that was not it. That was not it. That was not it. That was not it indeed. Subaru, something was. Hook. Something was supposed to have happened, isn't it? Something must have happened. Otherwise, it would not make sense. Otherwise, things would not hold true. Something happened, which made the impotent, irremediable Natsuki Subaru develop wings, attain flight, and turn into Natsuki Subaru, who could save everyone, someone, Emilia and the others. That was how it was supposed to be. That was why he was searching for it, dying, losing sanity, with bloodshot eyes. Upon each instance of reading the books of the dead, personally experiencing the impact, terror, and the agony of death which Natsuki Subaru had to taste by trifling with the altering situations, he grew further desperate and pursued his search. Yet, he was unable to find a single clue. Subaru, ugh, hook. He struck his head onto the floor. It was all right when he was in the midst of witnessing it. However, the instant he returned, his was fomented with disgrace. Subaru, Dad. Mom. Hook. There had been Natsuki Subaru, who exchanged words with his father and mother, and apologized to the two of them. There had been Natsuki Subaru, who was thrown into the different world, and for the sake of residing in this place, bid farewell to those two. Even after carelessly forgetting what all his self had committed, knowingly of the fact that his parents would be saddened, conveying words of love for self-satisfaction. Subaru, ugh, boo, eeg. He vomited. His tears overflowing. What was hurtful, what was excruciating, was that he was painfully aware of the feelings of Natsuki Subaru, and the fact that Subaru also got to know that his parents forgave it. Please don't forgive. Please curse. He wished his parents would speak ill of him, call him out for lacking filial piety. However, they did not act that way. Neither his father nor his mother be as per Subaru's wishes. In order to console himself, he wished his parents to call him a petty human or things similar. He was unable to achieve that. Subaru's father, Kenichi. Subaru's mother, Naoko. They were the greatest couple of parents. There had been his self, who was happy for that. There had been his self, who approved of the judgment Natsuki Subaru took, despite lacking all rights to be saved. There had been his self, who was going to be saved, making his unsightly. Was this the source for it? With this being the reason, did he turn into Natsuki Subaru? Subaru, no. No, no, no. That's not it. Not something like this. Scratching his head violently, striking his aching eyebrows with his fist, Subaru disparaged his own self. What Subaru sought was not spiritual salvation. What he sought was a key, a power further evident, which was established in terms of proper efficacy. The power which Subaru was ignorant of, which only Natsuki Subaru was cognizant of. Just as Subaru had succeeded in the manifestation of Cor Leonis, the special something which only Natsuki Subaru had awakened, that was. Subaru, the key to change this situation, I have to believe it is, or. The laceration of his guts, which had been the very last cause of his death, from the present moment, touching the wound he was supposed to have from that, Subaru whispered. His memories started to overlap with what he had witnessed in Meili's Book of the Dead. The assault on the mansion, Meili's both beloved and troublesome elder sister, Elsa's attack. A natural enemy for Natsuki Subaru. However, that was all about a world where everything came to an end. That was all about a world which Natsuki Subaru already surmounted. What was crucial was not sympathizing with Natsuki Subaru, but unveiling and obtaining the deception only he was supposed to possess, which only he was using. For that, only for that, read the Books of the Dead. Because only for that, Natsuki Subaru had been dying and redoing his actions. Subaru, please tell me, Natsuki Subaru. How are you special? How can only you stay being special? There must be something, right? Subaru, something must have changed you. Something must have rid you of your uselessness and turned you into someone else. Subaru, please change my weak, pathetic, petty self who can't be useful for shit. I'm fed up now. I can't see everyone suffering, not anymore. Subaru, something. Something is there, right? If something isn't there, then it doesn't make sense. Something happened. That's why you are different from me. It has to be that way. It has to be that way, or he will be rendered incapable of doing anything but to simply watch. Subaru, you were the same as me, weak, petty, completely powerless. Kneeling down time and time again, and on each instance having someone give a push to his back, as he wanted to recompense everyone who acted courteously towards him, as they had acted kindly towards him, he wanted to pay them back. Subaru, please, Natsuki Subaru. I request you. Please, just stop. It would have had been much, much better had he been a superhuman. He wished for him to be an existence completely dissimilar to his self, one who had transcended above weakness with both his and body. That is why he wished to be convinced by him that he had done what his self could never achieve. And yet, drawing books out as if plucking berries, having his head struck by continually stockpiling death, all whilst having shatter upon each instance of that, eagerly, earnestly, as if sipping mud, he ate into his life. But still, until the very end of the end, he did not cast aside the possibility he clung onto. Subaru. He opened up the book he had in his grasp. With the preparedness of his brain tissues being churned, his being violated, his soul being humiliated, he opened it up. After all, it was far more painful to have the very last hope severed rather than feeling ache or anguish. Subaru, you get it, right, Natsuki Subaru. As if, seemingly seeking consent, he called out to the person concerned who was not in presence here. The tone of that voice felt as if it had sustained a terrible loss of ambition. It could not be helped. After all, the person concerned was not someone to be enthusiastic about. He was not that great of a man. Whilst wishing for that to not happen, his fingers as if pulling a rope, he started to draw the Book of the Dead out. And what will follow will certainly be the finishing blow, harboring such feelings. Yeah, I get it. Subaru. A white world. Upon noticing, Subaru was not in the library, nor a shapeless existence overlapping with memories, but had been sent a place which he recognized, which was not here. There. I get it, Natsuki Subaru. Subaru. After all, because you are me, you know. Standing still within the white world, Sanpaku eyes he was well acquainted with, had been awaiting Subaru. Chapter 74, Natsuki Subaru. Short, black hair, legs with the same length as his upper body, Sanpaku eyes enough to kill someone. Those almost unpleasantly familiar features, no matter which one was to be chosen, were overlooking Natsuki Subaru while sitting on the white, bare ground. Subaru. Astounded, fixedly, he gazed a deep stare into the opposing person's face. No matter which angle he looked at it from, it was a face he was acquainted with. No, it looked slightly different. That was perhaps because it was, in a true sense, not the form he was accustomed to seeing. That which he had grown accustomed to looking at ordinarily, on overwhelmingly multiple occasions, was something reflected upon mirrors or the surface of water. Strictly speaking, the human face was not perfectly symmetrical on both halves, that alone shaped a sensitive disparity. That is why. Ah, is that so? It's not a mirror's reflection, so it feels a bit awkward, huh? In that sense, this is probably closer to imaging it as facing a photograph or a video recording, isn't it? Subaru, Huck. Ah, could it be, you thought of the same thing? When he slightly tightened his cheeks upon the single voice seemingly having read his mind, the opposing person precisely guessed those feelings as well. Though was flustered by even that, any response he could possibly give could neither serve as poison nor medicine. In the first place, what was essential for Subaru was not something on the likes of quick exchange of remarks. Far greater, precisely that, the problem which seemingly jolted away everything was. Once again then. Hey, sibling. Subaru. No, sibling feels slightly faulty for an expression, huh? More accurately this'd be. Hey, another me. Raising a single hand, the personage greeted with a relaxed tone. No, he was not a person so unduly distant. He was in existence such that even calling him someone close would be a half-hearted expression. After all, because the one present there was unmistakably was, with the same face as Natsuki Subaru, none other than Natsuki Subaru. Subaru, Natsuki Subaru. Subaru, you know, doesn't that have a strange ring to it? On top of that, calling yourself using the full name. Though, I don't know using what else would be correct. Though it's a situation often there in manga and stuff, it's pretty troublesome in reality. Subaru, Natsuki Subaru. Discerning rage for Subaru, who piled up remarks as if talking about good weather, Subaru stood right up at that spot. And as he tried to grasp the opponent's collars, his legs tangled instantly. With no strength driven into his knees, his stance crumbled. Subaru, whoops, watch out. Subaru, Huck, don't touch me. Subaru, who was in front, caught his body which was pitching forward and falling. The moment he came in contact with those arms, Subaru experienced unbearable repugnance and shook off the opponent's arms. At the same pace, taking steps and distancing himself away from Subaru, he continued glaring at the opponent. Subaru, why are you here? First of all, where is this place? With Subaru within his field of vision, Subaru signaled the surrounding white world with his hands. White space, a place with nothing, that was just as the cradle of Od Lagna where he had confronted that sin Archbishop of Gluttony, Louis Arnab. Subaru, shit. It was a total mess inside of his mind. In accordance with the real time that flowed within the tower, his meeting with Louis was not something which happened even a few hours ago. However, for Subaru, who had stockpiled multiple attempts pertaining to the 5 obstacles, it felt like an incident in the faraway, distant past. Furthermore, Subaru had personally experienced the life and death of Natsuki Subaru more than 20 times through the Books of the Dead. Even if the contents of the Books of the Dead were something which felt short, running through life and death in less than 5 minutes, there had also been more than a year's time where nothing had occurred. He had tasted those successively, indulgently. Neither were there any guarantees regarding his recognition not getting disordered. The passage of time was vague. On top of that, he had much awaited this meeting with the unanticipated opponent. Subaru widened his eyes and waved his arms about violently. Subaru, why are you in this place? Subaru, it is the proof of you having caught up to me. Subaru. Subaru, you read the Book of the Dead, and caught up to me. Everything you were not aware of, you must have seen it in the form of personally experiencing it. My life in a different world, alright. Subaru, huh? With an indifferent tone, Subaru responded to Subaru, who had depleted his breath and clamored. Viewing that composed attitude, Subaru gritted his molars. He was unable to stomach that conclusive expression, that attitude of seemingly knowing all, anything and everything. First of all, what did this man, making that odious face, say just now? Subaru, I caught up to you? Subaru, that's right. There's not a single thing anymore, which you don't know about me. That's why. Subaru, Dante, joke around hook. Subaru. Subaru, I caught up to you, you say? Stop kidding. Don't lie. Not yet. I don't know about that which is the most important, which is much more essential, yet. Roaring with his eyes open wide, Subaru seized hold of Subaru's collars this time. Upon that usage of brute strength, Subaru made no attempt to parry it. Pulling the opponent's collars towards himself at the same pace, from a distance where both of their breaths entwined, he glared into those black eyes. Within the dark eyes of the face which was the same as his, the instant he perceived the same face reflected within, nauseating self-hatred surged within his own self. Whether he harbored that self-hatred for himself or for the himself present before his eyes, was neither known to him nor did he even contemplate considering it. Merely remaining at that extremely close distance, he glared at the opponent and unraveled his fangs. Subaru, tell me. It's pretty convenient you're here. Tell me now. The reason you became yourself must be somewhere. I haven't seen that. I haven't found it. That is. Subaru, the reason I became myself? Subaru, that's right. There must have been a cue for you to turn into yourself. You are. Subaru, that must have been seen by you, no? With his collars seized, Subaru was gazing at Subaru, non-resistant. He did not even try to repel away the arms waving him about. Subaru received that as a hallucination, as if he wasn't even doing anything. He perceived exactly that, as being looked down onto from a higher level. Subaru, stop looking at me like that. Subaru, ga hook. Aiming at that conclusive side profile, Subaru launched his fist. The fist wielded firm impact, blowing Subaru off as if he had been strummed. There was no recoil, no similar pain striking back at Subaru. The pain Subaru sustained, injured, was only the pain Subaru had sustained. That was not identical to what Natsuki Subaru had sustained. Subaru, lining up words, as if knowing that. Is that so? I get it. Smacked by Subaru, Subaru had knelt down on his right leg. Observing him rubbing his struck cheek with the back of his hand, Subaru consented. That opponent ahead of his eyes, who spoke with a mouth as if knowing everything, was not mistaken. First of all, if this was the cradle of Od Lagna, the Hall of Memories, would that not make him the opponent he should be utmost vigilant of above all other matters? Subaru, are you, Lewis? The Sin Archbishop of Gluttony. It's you again, right? Subaru, me? Subaru, don't play dumb. Last time, Lewis, whom he had encountered in the Hall of Memories, attempted to prompt segregation between Subaru and Natsuki Subaru, and eat that existence away from his head through one way or another. Back then, he had managed to escape those fangs from a hair-strand's breadth worth of distance, but had their nature been such that they would be willing to give up through simply that alone, they would not be called Sin Archbishops. Just how ugly, how irredeemable the existences known as the Sin Archbishops were, he had witnessed that in its entirety. Betelgeuse, Regulus, Sirius, Capella, all of them were the absolute lowest and worst of failures as personalities. Lay, Roy, and Lewis were no exceptions to that either, he could especially affirm that. What if Lewis, who had been lying in wait inside of Reed's Book of the Dead, was utilizing some form of method and hiding in ambush within the Book of the Dead of Natsuki Subaru? Thus, it was plausible that she had been boldly lingering and awaiting Subaru. Subaru, isn't that true, Gluttony? Louis Arnab? There's no way I can be confused by you, who can change shapes and forms, like this. Relying upon the memories and names stolen from others, rather than just the opponent's abilities but extorting even their form, and chewing and digesting them as if they were her belongings, was the authority of Louis Arnab, as well as that of her elder brothers, Lay Batten Catos and Roy Alfred. She had demonstrated that artifice even within the tower, lacking any regret. Nothing felt out of place should her place of demonstrating that merely have gotten changed to the Hall of Memories. Subaru, this time for sure, devouring me and hijacking me, is that what your plan is? Even after being rejected once, persistent little. Do you really want to return by death so much? Without any vacillation, he voiced the words return by death. He had personally experienced the memory of having to taste hellish anguish by voicing that on several instances. The penalty of having his heart be crushingly gripped accompanied with immense pain. However, it was still alright if only his self was to be the one to experience that agony. Compared to the cases where it befell over Emilia, or the surroundings. However, the penalty was not invoked for Subaru, who had shouted whilst crushing faint horror. Subaru before his eyes did not seem to have had his heart crushingly gripped at all either. In but a single instant he understood that Subaru had also been relieved at the lack of the evil influence's ingress, seemingly having been on lookout for the same. That was infuriating. With the same face as his, he also bore the same thoughts as him. He thought of it as an assertion that, at maximum, he and his opponent were the same. Subaru, Huck. Just get it already. Is this really that amazing of a power? Is this an admirable power? It's just dying and redoing. Dying and redoing. Nothing more than that. If I, who uses it, am shit, then the results it brings are also shit. That's why. Subaru. Subaru, that's why I couldn't save anyone. I let everyone die. Because I am weak, I make everyone miserable. Just like how, even now, nobody will get saved. Return by death was nothing so adequate. It was always far better to not have something like this be of need. Though there had been a witch who claimed this power to be something splendid, the utmost prime and nonpareil thing in this world, he could never hold the same opinion. Even if an ant is made to wield artillery, it can never utilize it. Ultimately, it was unsuited to it. He was a weak, petty, lonely child who kept crying and throwing tantrums. What the witches in that dream tea party had stated was correct. He was hopeless. He was weak. He could never find it. He could never use it. Both Gluttony and the Witch of Greed, who failed to comprehend that, were damned. Just how many times would he have to get deceived? How many times would he have to get his hope trampled underfoot? How many times would he have to get his vanquished, until he learnt? Why, after countlessly getting deceived, countlessly having his hope trampled underfoot, countlessly having his vanquished, does he still think of doing it? Return by Death displayed all of the unpleasant fragments of the world. It displayed the absurdities, the irrationalities, the destiny enough to make one avert one's eyes. Yet, how come? Subaru, I love everyone. Without noticing, with his head hanging down, kneeling down at that very spot, Subaru shouted as if casting a curse. And upon the disgraceful grievance similar to weeping, Subaru horizontally shook his head. Whilst shaking his head horizontally, for once, at this instant, he said, converging with his words. Subaru, I love everyone. That's why I can't stop. Subaru. Erasing the tinge of red on his struck cheek with his fingers, Subaru stood up in Subaru's stead. The same attire, the same expression, possessing the same face and name, Natsuki Subaru, who seemed to be decisively different from himself whilst that looked at Natsuki Subaru. Subaru, the position you were put in, to be honest, even imagining its difficulty is rough. Everything completely new, starting from level 6 having the status of initial stage without the option of going back. The complaints you voice out too, I understand all of them. Because those are wounds I have gotten to taste time and time again. With immense powerlessness, with immense ignorance, it was a countenance that had gotten to taste that countless times. No, he had gotten to taste that countless times. The defeat, the agony, the grief of death which Subaru had to taste, Subaru was aware of it all. He had witnessed it all with these eyes. He had tasted it all, with this body, and precisely because he had tasted those, precisely because he knew that was not a lie, he could not accept Subaru's words. He did not want to accept them. Subaru, had I been strong, had I been smart, had I been more. It must be frustrating. Subaru, speaking as if you understand it. About me, what the hell do you? Subaru, I do know. You must also be aware of what I know. It's a pointless quarrel, actually. For both me and you. Subaru, Huck. There was no strength in his words of objection. It had been a matter of course. An objection repels away the opponent's words, brushes them away, suggesting lack of agreement, crushingly defeating them, making the statement that you are wrong. Such an intention was essential. Subaru of now did not have the ability to face Subaru with that. After all, he was aware of it. He was aware that that was no lie or deceit, but the entirety of Natsuki Subaru. Subaru, I didn't look at your memories or anything. Subaru, hey, you can't be doing this after looking through one's diary as per your own convenience. Subaru, I didn't look at your memories or anything. Upon hearing Subaru's seemingly sullen voice, Subaru powerfully clenched his fists. Slapped, poured with jeers, yet not bending his approach of dialogue. Subaru gave the impression of being far more mature than Subaru. perhaps even that, was a matter of course. After all, the truth is Subaru was supposed to be a year older than Subaru. That too, having observed rich experiences in the different world and having personally experienced death on multiple occasions, on top of that, having woven many bonds and acquiring the position of his current self. But still. Subaru, I didn't look at your memories or anything. Hook. Once again, Subaru utilized those words. For once, right now Subaru said nothing to Subaru, who stockpiled the very same repentances. Subaru, without even seeking any response, resumed as if incoherently muttering. Subaru, I wanted to have hopes for you. That you were an amazing guy, and that if I got to know the something which was supporting your amazing nature, I would be able to do the same thing too. But still, he ended up knowing it. He ended up witnessing everything. Natsuki Subaru had absolutely no difference from the Natsuki Subaru present here, that he was a weak and petty man, he ended up knowing that. In the time unknown to Subaru, meeting people unknown to Subaru, running past a chronicle unknown to Subaru, having witnessed a scenery unknown to Subaru, he was merely an ordinary human who had done all that. Subaru, why denying you? I wanted to proclaim something plausible and fulfill it. However, he could not do that. Subaru, after all, I understand your feelings. Because you are me. The world Natsuki Subaru had witnessed, had tasted, he had viewed it. Natsuki Subaru had fallen in love with this world, with the people of this world, with Emilia and everyone else, and the wounds he had accepted for them to survive, he had viewed all of that. He had been misunderstanding. He had been misapprehending. Since it was regarding himself, it may be appropriate to say he had conceded. The illusion of Natsuki Subaru being a superhuman had been shattered and cast aside. Subaru, yeah, I get it. I got it. Why you kept standing up again and again, why you never gave up after dying again and again, is because that's all you can do. Just like Subaru had also gotten slammed into walls he could do nothing about on innumerable instances. Upon each occasion of that, he died recurrently, repeatedly, stockpiling deaths, amending the way he met, amending the way he connected. Subaru overcame hindrances. That was all. Subaru, can there be someone who won't stand up despite Rem telling him so much to do so? Acting conceitedly after getting knocked by Otto, I noticed that. I always knew that Dad and Mom were considerate like that. I mean, they are my dad and mom, after all. The scenery Natsuki Subaru passed through, the cue essential for surmounting, not the something which Subaru sought but merely accumulated wishes, were certainly there. Subaru, I love Emilia. I want her to rely on me to protect her. I want to be with her. The reason I wanted to be a knight was so that she thought of me that way. I was happy. I want to walk outside with her without any failures, she, who was afraid of getting hated, and I want to boast around that she is someone capable of being loved by everyone. I finally had Beatrice accompany me. I want to make her happy as much as the time she had been in pain. She has the right to be happy. That is why. Subaru, the reason why you don't give up is just because you love everyone. Bloody bastard. Why aren't you a superhuman? Why are you still an idiotic brat? Subaru, be strong like Reinhardt. Be someone who can do anything like Julius. If you can't do that, then be useful like Ferris. How about exceeding in a single thing like Wilhelmsan? Choose even one, for you two. By taking time and even experiencing agony, what he realized was merely that Natsuki Subaru was an ordinary human, that he possessed only the cards which were the same as what Subaru did, that he extremely lacked skill in properly utilizing them, that neither did he have good fortune when it came to victory and defeat. Even a single one of just those. Subaru, any single one of them. With a powerless voice, having forfeited all spirit, he whispered. Any single one of them, even a single one of them, grasping tightly the hand incapable of wielding anything. Subaru, you are Lewis, aren't you? With a husky voice, he uttered a query unrelated to what he had said till now. Listening to that, Subaru, who had remained silent for long, nodded, saying Subaru, no. I'm not Lewis. Unfortunately, I won't say even that. I'd rather not have her disturbing. You don't need an explanation for her personality being the worst, do you? Subaru, yeah. I guess so. Responding with a meager, feeble voice, Subaru hid his own face with his arms. Concealing that his throat had shriveled up due to his howling up until the previous moment, oozily, pain started to well up in his fist which had hit Subaru. If this was the Hall of Memories, then Subaru's body could not be stated to be a real entity here, is how it was supposed to be, and yet, it was absurd that he could feel pain. Yes, pain, death, was ever absurd and ever difficult to bear. That was accurately why the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, Louis Arneb, was mistaken. The thought of wishing for that by one's own accord was unmistakably mistaken. Subaru, why did you disappear? Subaru, Subaru, why did you vanish away? You disappeared, that caused so many hardships. The impetus of the ever-present incomprehension, and the origin of everything. The reason why Natsuki Subaru disappeared, and Natsuki Subaru was born. Just what happened to the body of Natsuki Subaru, who had disappeared alongside his memories? Subaru, the reason why you disappeared. Subaru, that was a total miss on my part. I entered Teijita with the intention of finding a way to capture Reed. Then, through the series of events, it was all great till I found Reed's book, but... Subaru, then, Reed's book turned out to be empty. Subaru, then I was put in the same bowl as Gluttony. The rest is, you probably get it even without me having to say it. Scratching his head, Subaru looked back onto his own shame. Encountering Louis Arneb in the Hall of Memories, Natsuki Subaru had gotten memories stolen. And, forgetting all of his life in the different world until that point, his self, of course, created Natsuki Subaru who could not apprehend the feelings of the people around him. Subaru, don't depreciate yourself like that. Would be difficult even if I tell you so, huh? After all, you are me. Subaru. Natsuki Subaru is a weak, petty, irredeemable huge idiot. Subaru, that's not wrong. Subaru, but... Subaru? Whilst making a wry smile and gesturing his agreement, Subaru raised his eyebrows in response to Subaru, who had whispered powerlessly. While looking at that Subaru, Subaru voiced the continuance of the words he had held back. That was... Subaru, you are an amazing guy, Natsuki Subaru. That was his honest opinion, lacking all exaggeration, having witnessed him return by death greater than 20 times. Whilst looking at the man before him, he steadily narrowed his eyes. With a face he was used to looking at, with a face he was tired of looking at, a face he thought that was distressful to look at, it was his own self. It was his own self, it was not his own self, though it was his own self, he did not believe it to be his own self. That face had a reaction as if having been pricked with something unanticipated for the first time, it was gratifying. Subaru, the closest person, huh? There were not many humans who loved their own self from the bottom of their heart. Subaru particularly belonged to that category, and Subaru hated himself. Perhaps Natsuki Subaru was no different in that regard either. Subaru hated himself. However, as the closest person, when Natsuki Subaru saw Natsuki Subaru, to say this would be exceedingly embarrassing but so cool, was the thought that crossed his mind. Subaru, I respect you, who is weak, hopeless, unable to do anything, but still, continues to struggle, and loves them. That's WHY. Subaru. Subaru, the meaning of me, reading your Book of the Dead, was there. He had not opened up the Book of the Dead merely in order to gnash his weakness, to grieve the cease of trails, to slam grudges on his self who had the same face as his own self. Of course, neither was it to have the megalomania of following up to the superhuman Natsuki Subaru's roots and attaining unparalleled strength, granted. What he sought was learning that Natsuki Subaru was merely human, his deeds, his path. Subaru, you sure are a guy who says embarrassing stuff suddenly, you. Subaru, who had remained frozen by Subaru's oration until then, abruptly came alive. Subaru had his eyes narrowed at the ill humor. No, in a state of feeling somewhat awkward, he sharply gazed at Subaru and slowly stretched his fingers ahead. Subaru, it's pretty questionable for me to say it myself, but you sure can say all that after having looked back onto my entirety up until now. Now that it's mentioned, it's Natsuki Subaru starting life in a different world from zero, you know. Subaru, it feels so weird to have the leading actor's name be the same as yourself. Subaru, it's better than having the heroine have the same name as your mom, isn't it? No, not that. Unreservedly reciprocating persiflage, Subaru exchanged a gaze with Subaru. Subaru, who somewhat seemed to have tasted an undershoulder swing down, he pointed at himself with his hand and... Subaru, I had said all that earlier, but is this seriously okay? The possibility of me being a fake of Louis is not supposed to have completely disappeared, you know. Subaru, it has disappeared. You didn't revert even after I seriously hit you. Subaru, I mean, to revert back by that is just in the case of Yanagisawa's copy ability. As per Subaru's objections, that could not truly be used as rationale. However, at that point in time, Subaru had let go of his skepticism regarding Subaru. The reason for that was perhaps what Subaru had commented earlier. For argument's sake, even if Louis Arneb ate away one's life away from head to toe without sparing a single part, he believed that she would not be able to reconstruct that face, that voice. Because she did not have the ability to comprehend blessedness, felicity, happiness. That is why. Subaru, she, who loved nobody, cannot understand the emotion of returning by death for the sake of someone you love. Subaru. Subaru before his eyes kept silent, as Subaru took a long, painful inhale. Now that he had voiced it out, it was terribly stale, not but sweet, nothing's pleasing to hear, nothing more. Yet he had been unable to discover any other responses. That is why the Subaru before his eyes was unquestionably Natsuki Subaru. Subaru, why are you here? Were you waiting for me? He recognized the Subaru before his eyes to be possessing the same roots as himself. On top of that, the doubt surfacing in his mind was regarding the two Subaru happening upon each other here. Upon that question of Subaru's, Subaru firmly stepped on the pure white floor. Subaru, the reason why you and I met each other here is because this place is the sole point of contact between you and me. Subaru, the point of contact between you and me. Subaru, the reason me, who has memories within the tower, and you, who doesn't have memories, crossed over is just because of the Book of the Dead of this area. Both ahead of this and before this, you and I couldn't have met each other. Subaru. On second thought, let's go back to the first question. Why are you here? Without digesting the explanation Subaru gave, Subaru, once again, cast the same question. Strictly speaking, he could not comprehend the logic behind the two Subaru coming across each other here. It ended up being that Subaru, who possessed memories, and Subaru, who did not possess memories, both existed alongside each other. The rules of the formation of a Book of the Dead, its intricacies were unknown. Now that if it were to be mentioned, the book of Natsuki Subaru piling up the count of deaths up until now was strange in itself. Precisely, that was a phenomenon which, if the deaths of Natsuki Subaru were not being observed from outside of the world, it would not come into existence. Did that mean that O.D. Lagna fulfilled the role of that observer? Subaru, but if that's the case, then Lewis, who was in the Hall of Memories, if she had been observing return by death, I don't know for what reason she would be in such high spirits. If she can recognize that from the outside. Subaru, she may be staying in the Hall of Memories, but she can't be its ruler. Its ruler is probably a guy even more nasty, I think. If you consider it from this situation. Subaru, I get it when you say it's a nasty guy. The one most plausible is. Halting words there for once, Subaru and Subaru collectively stated. The sage flugel. They called that to be the ill-natured utmost plausible personage. The personage who had connections to the establishment of this Pleiades watchtower, installing a trial such that Reed was placed in it, furthermore, imposing an ascetic of unknown termination upon Shala for 400 years. In all honesty, Shala was pitiable. If it would be possible, then he wanted to snatch her away from that master of hers. Subaru, then, the reason for myself, both possessing and not possessing memories existing alongside is. Subaru. That's the type of question difficult to find an answer for. Since I am here, and you are here. Subaru, that's just how it is, huh? Whilst feeling a sense of unease, catching Subaru's words, Subaru drew his chin in. The truth is, it had been the kind of question lacking a question setter. Even if theories of some kind were to be arrived at, in the end, they could never provide the answer. If this question must be investigated thoroughly, and the answer must be found, then it was. Subaru, as long as you truly aren't Louis Arnab, it shouldn't be a problem. Subaru, that's a pretty bothersome way to confirm. Do you really trust me? Subaru, I trust you, I trust you. If you let me hit you one more time on the other side, I'll trust you more. Subaru, is that so? I wouldn't say it's the best bargain, you know. Interchanging frivolous dialogue in a relaxed manner, Subaru shrugged his shoulders at Subaru's words. The cowardly way of conversation for delaying the core of the dialogue like this, with other people aside, but when it was used with oneself it got seen through far too easily. That is why, Subaru took it upon himself and for the third time, fired the same question. Subaru, hey, another me. For what purpose are you here? Subaru. Subaru, you must also be knowing, I won't listen to something like that. Upon Subaru's attitude, who opted for reticence, Subaru whispered with his black eyes straightened. Even after hearing that, he did not return back persiflage similar to the one until now. Instead of that, what levitated in Subaru's black eyes was the radiance that had always been present since the beginning. Perhaps that was, often called, what is known as, the feeling of guilt. Subaru, hey, what do you think will happen in unification of memories? That was why Subaru had deliberately asked that question cheerfully. In the pattern of a conversation about this trick, what would be the normal answer, huh? I have no idea. Clearly, it feels like something which has no answer to it. To be honest, you seem to be the more knowledgeable one here. Do you know about any rules that would be advantageous to know about which I don't? You read the book Dissecting Me, didn't you? It's as likely as not. As likely as not, huh? As likely as not. If you and I carelessly bump into each other and one eliminates the other, if it's something like that, what will you do? Don't say all that. Whatever you think when you're anxious, generally I also think the same when I'm anxious, that's why. That's that. Then, no hard feelings no matter which one wins, No, I sure will be crazy bitter. And so if I'll be bitter, then that means you'll be bitter too. Well, I guess so. That's probably right. Pretty shallow ed, huh? What did you say? Pretty shallow ed. Huh, is something wrong? No, I just probably misheard, I guess. Ah, that's right. There are some things you may wonder about their possibility, so there are some things I want to tell you, can I? Well, since you've heard everything I've said up till now, go right ahead and say anything. Originally, you were more informed than me regarding this world. Though that advantage has more or less disappeared by me reading the Book of the Dead, there are some things that have changed a bit, you know? Things that have changed? After losing memories, I talked to everyone, I got to know everyone. It's the story of Natsuki Subaru starting life in a different world from zero you don't know about. First up, Meili, okay. She's a bit, in various ways, saddled with bombs upon herself, so it's rough, but she understands if you talk to her, so please, properly talk to her. I'm imagining Meili-senpai to be pretty angry right now. Yeah, got it. And then, there's this huge scorpion wandering about inside the tower, but its true identity is Shala. That makes things really dangerous, but she's not doing that, because she wants to. Please, help her too. Yeah, got it. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say this, but when I met Louis the First got my back kicked hard by REM. Back then, I didn't remember Rem, so it was only after I read the book did I recall what kind of a girl Rem was, but as expected, that had been my REM. No, it's my Rem, you know. No, mine. Mine. Ram had said that when the season of snowmelt arrives, things invisible will be visible and will surely show their faces. As expected of her. Yeah, I guess so. About that guy Julius. Well, it'll be fine even if I don't say anything, isn't it? He's not that unreliable that I must tell you something about him. Yeah, agreed. Thank you for apologizing to Dad and Mom. Yeah, Thank you for saving Otto and Garfield. Yeah. Thank you for saving Petra, Frederica, and everyone from Erlarm Village. Yeah. Thank you for taking Beatrice out and holding her hand. Emilia. Thank you for falling in love with Emilia. I also love her. I really love her. Yeah, I know. Natsuki Subaru. You are an amazing guy, I sincerely know that. If it's you, then it'll certainly be alright. Yeah. I guess so. Yeah. If it's us, then it'll certainly be alright. It'll be alright, huh? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it'll be alright. You are amazing, I sincerely know that. Yeah, but, I have to say, that looks like my summer vacation is over. With a shake of their hands, a cliched exchange had been the finale. Subaru. He inhaled and exhaled. Likely, the unification had not been conducted in an irregular form. No, by all rights, there had been no supposition of the process of unification being carried out in this place. Subaru's very existence, all happenings that had very much occurred, all of them had been irregular. That is WHY. Subaru. Standing stock still, Subaru finally noticed the tears rivulet down his own cheeks, when they dripped down his chin and fell as droplets. For some reason or another, he did not feel like wiping them off, as seemingly those streaming tears certainly had not been shed by Subaru, is what it appeared as. The tears shed by someone who was right now, steadily melting together with Subaru, within Subaru. And, repeatedly breathing deeply, he went around the consciousness within his mind. What had been scorched within his own memories were Subaru, Huck. Suddenly, 20 deaths Natsuki Subaru was unmindful of, flashed back. All of them told of struggling and writhing within the tower, and the numerous deaths which became a part of the course of events tasted as if getting taken over. The visuals of all worrying sections established a connection. They had established a connection, but Subaru, even you, are crossing over the bridge more than sufficiently, you know. His other self, who had lined up words thoroughly commending Subaru. Digesting his fight in solitude and his heavy struggle for trusting his comrades, Subaru arrived to an understanding. Certainly, it was just as what Subaru had stated. I can respect you. With such thoughts, deep breathing as if trying to decelerate his eccentrically rapid pulse beat, he bowed his head. After that, Subaru raised his face and glared towards the front. That was the unchanging white space. The area of blank space resulting from the Hall of Memories, which had produced his irregular state. The place where another Subaru had been until merely a few moments earlier, who had shaken hands with Subaru. Looking down onto the petite shadow of someone crowding that space, Subaru straightened his black eyes. And Subaru, so did you get to see what you wanted to see? Louis Arnab. Subaru softly asked that to the one who had proceeded to read through the books of the dead and had reached this place and subsequently disappeared. Natsuki Subaru no, Louis Arnab. End of chapter 73 and 74, Natsuki Subaru.